You grew up believing freedom was your birthright. You were told that slavery ended centuries ago, that chains were broken, and that modern society represents the highest point of human liberty. You were taught that laws exist to protect you, governments serve you, and citizenship is a privilege earned by living in a civilized world. But what if none of that is true? What if freedom didn't disappear, but was redesigned? What if the modern legal system was never meant to make you free, but to make ownership invisible? This is uncomfortable to hear because it attacks something deeply personal, not your politics, not your beliefs, your identity. Because if freedom is an illusion, then the life you're living may not be a choice at all. It may be a contract you never realized you signed. To understand this, we have to go backwards, not to medieval times, not to feudal kings. We have to go to Rome. Not the ruins, not the movies, but Rome as a system, Rome as a machine. Because Rome didn't fall, it evolved. Roman law is not ancient history. It is the foundation of modern law across Europe, the Americas, and much of the world. Civil law systems, constitutional structures, courts, property rights, labor law, corporate law, all of them descend from Roman legal logic. And that matters because Roman law was not created for free people. It was created for a slave society. Rome was honest about hierarchy. It didn't pretend everyone was equal. It divided people into categories with surgical precision. At the top were those who possessed rights by nature. Below them were those who possessed rights only by permission. And at the bottom were those who possessed no rights at all. The terrifying part is that this structure never disappeared. It just changed language. In Rome, a free person owned the product of their labor. A slave did not. That single difference defined everything. Slavery wasn't just about physical force. It was about economic control. If you do not own what your labor produces, you are not free, no matter how comfortable your life appears. Now look at the modern world. You are told your labor is free. You can choose your profession. You are protected by labor laws. You receive wages. But here is the question no one wants to ask. Who owns what you create? The law guarantees you compensation. It guarantees safety regulations. It guarantees contracts. But it does not guarantee ownership of the result. What you build, design, write, manufacture, or produce belongs to the system you operate within. You receive a ration, a salary, a number on a screen. The form has changed. The logic has not. Ancient Rome gave slaves food and shelter. Modern systems give money and credit. The exchange is the same: time and life energy for survival tokens. And just like Rome, the system insists this arrangement is natural. You may think this is philosophical wordplay. It isn't, because law does not care how you feel. Law cares how you are classified. Here is where things get disturbing. In modern constitutions, you will notice two different terms used carefully and consistently: human rights, civil rights. They sound similar. They are not. The law never uses words casually. A human and a citizen are not the same legal entity. A human is described as possessing natural, inalienable rights. These rights exist by birth. They require no permission. A citizen, however, exists only through registration, through documentation, through recognition by the state. Citizenship is a legal status granted by a governing entity, and it comes with obligations, duties, and restrictions. In Rome, this distinction already existed. Patricians possessed rights because they were born into them. Plebeians possessed rights only because the state allowed it. Slaves possessed none. When you present a passport, you are not presenting yourself as a human being. You are presenting a legal persona, a constructed identity recognized by the system. And the system always prioritizes the paper version of you over the living one. You can say you are free, you can believe you are sovereign, but if you carry documents issued by the system decides which version of you is real. This is why participation matters. Voting matters, signing matters, Registering matters, because participation is consent. Take the word referendum. It sounds democratic, but its historical name is plebiscite, a decision of the plebs. Participation confirms classification. The system does not force you to accept your status, it invites you to affirm it. Rome understood something modern societies perfected. Stable control does not rely on violence, it relies on agreement. You are not dragged into the system. You are educated into it, trained to see compliance as responsibility, identity as paperwork, freedom as permission. Rome didn't vanish. It passed the torch. After the Western Empire collapsed, the Eastern Roman Empire continued. Then came the Holy Roman Empire. Then empires with new flags and old titles. Caesar became Kaiser. Caesar became Czar. The word never disappeared because the authority never disappeared. Even modern states carry Roman DNA. Senates, prefects, legal codes, judicial robes. The architecture of power remains unchanged because it works. And power does not speak only through laws. It speaks through symbols. You see them every day and never question them. Bundles of rods, axes, eagles, scales, columns, robes. These are not decorations, they are warnings. The fasces, a bundle of rods bound together with an axe, was the symbol of Roman authority. It represented the right to punish and the right to kill. It is where the word fascism comes from. And yet, this symbol appears across government buildings, courtrooms, and institutions in modern democracies. The scales of justice are not about fairness. In Roman law, they were used to weigh property, including human property. They measured value, not morality. Judges wear robes because Roman elites wore togas. Clothing marked status, a visible line between those who judge and those who are judged. Symbols do not lie. They reveal continuity. And now we reach the most uncomfortable realization of all. From the perspective of Roman law, a state is not fundamentally different from a corporation, or a syndicate, or an organized group managing shared assets. The word republic comes from res publica, public property, the public thing. In Italian, our thing is Cosa Nostra, the name chosen by the mafia. The similarity is not coincidence. Both describe an organization managing territory, resources, and people. History proves this overlap. Corporations have ruled like states. States have acted like corporations. Armies, taxes, laws, flags, all tools of resource management. And the most valuable resource has always been people. If the state is a corporate entity, then what are you? Not a shareholder, you receive no dividends. Not an employee, you pay more than you receive. You are inventory, a managed asset. And here is the final trick. The system cannot enslave you by force. Roman law forbids it. Slavery must be accepted, confirmed, signed. Throughout history, oaths, registrations, censuses, baptisms, citizenship ceremonies all served the same function: voluntary submission under legal ritual. Modern citizenship performs this role perfectly. You cannot simply opt out. You cannot exist unregistered. Property can be transferred. Assets can be sold. But inventory cannot disappear. Even emancipation does not mean freedom. In Roman law, emancipation meant changing owners, leaving one authority and entering another, from family to state, from private control to public control. The passport is not a key, it is a tag. And the deepest control is linguistic. You call yourself human, Homo sapiens, wise man. That's what you were told it means. But Latin is not poetic, it is precise. Homo refers to earth, soil, material. In Roman usage, homo often meant slave, a thing, not a rights-bearing being. Sapiens comes from sapio, to taste, to be flavorful, nutritious. Together, the phrase does not describe a wise being, it describes consumable matter, a biological resource. Even history's most famous phrase reveals this logic. Ecce homo, behold the man, spoken by a Roman official. It was not compassion, it was classification. Behold the slave. This is not metaphor, this is legal worldview. And now you understand why this knowledge is dangerous, because once you see the system, you cannot unsee it. The question is no longer whether you are free, the question is whether you are ready to live without illusion. Once you accept that modern power doesn't rely on chains, everything around you starts to feel different. The streets look the same, the buildings haven't moved, the laws haven't changed overnight. But your position inside the system suddenly feels exposed, like realizing the room you've lived in your entire life was actually a cage with transparent walls. The genius of modern control is not force, it is normalization. The system doesn't need to threaten you, it needs you to believe your position is natural, reasonable, and unavoidable. This is why the language of law is so important. Because language shapes perception, and perception determines obedience. You are constantly told you live under the rule of law, that laws apply equally to everyone, that no one is above them. But this idea only holds if everyone involved is the same type of legal entity. They are not. There is a critical distinction that almost no one talks about, because once you see it, the entire structure of authority begins to wobble. The law does not govern living people. It governs legal persons. A legal person is not a human being. It is an abstract construct. A name written in capital letters, a registered identity, a role recognized by institutions. Corporations are legal persons. Governments are legal persons. And so is the version of you that exists on paper. The living individual, breathing, thinking, experiencing reality, exists outside the law. The law cannot see you directly. It can only interact with the mask you wear when you enter the system. That mask has a name, persona. Persona is Latin for mask, an actor's face covering, something worn to play a role on stage. When you sign documents, pay taxes, appear in court, or interact with institutions, you are not acting as a living being. You are acting as a persona. And here's the critical detail. The obligations of the persona are enforced using the body of the living being. The system finds the mask, the body pays. The system imprisons the identity, the body suffers. The system taxes the persona. The body works longer. This asymmetry is not accidental, it is the core design. You might wonder why the system goes through such elaborate abstraction instead of simply ruling by brute force. The answer is stability. A system that depends on violence is fragile. A system that depends on consent is almost eternal. Rome understood this better than any civilization before or since. In Roman law, there was a clear rule. Slavery imposed by force creates resistance. Slavery accepted voluntarily creates order. The slave must acknowledge the master. The subject must recognize authority. Without recognition, power collapses. This is why rituals matter. Oaths matter. Registrations matter. Ceremonies matter. They are not symbolic, they are functional. Every time you sign your name on a form, you reaffirm the contract. Every time you renew documents, you reaffirm it again. Every time you identify yourself using state-issued credentials, you step back into the role. You are not forced to do this at gunpoint. You are compelled by necessity. You need access to food, shelter, work, movement, and access is conditional. This is how control becomes invisible. You believe you are choosing compliance, when in reality, you are choosing survival inside a closed system. And there is no outside. Every piece of land on Earth belongs to a jurisdiction. Every ocean is claimed. Every airspace is regulated. You cannot step outside the legal field because the entire planet has been divided into administrative zones. This is why renouncing citizenship is nearly impossible. Not technically, but practically. The system cannot allow assets to exist unregistered. Property must belong to someone. Inventory must be listed. A human without affiliation is a legal anomaly. You were told this is for your protection, that without a state you would be vulnerable, exposed, stateless. But that argument reveals the truth rather than hiding it. Protection from what? From other states, from other corporations, from rival management structures. The state does not protect you from domination. It protects its claim over you. This becomes obvious when you examine the relationship between taxation and consent. Taxes are framed as contributions, civic duty, payment for shared services. But in corporate logic, they resemble something else entirely. Maintenance fees. You pay to remain within the system. You pay to exist legally. You pay for permission to operate, and refusal is not an option, because refusal means exclusion. Try to live without participating, without registration, without identification, without income reporting, without compliance. You will quickly discover that the system does not need to arrest you to destroy you. It simply denies access. No account, no employment, no movement, no health care, no shelter. Not because you committed a crime, but because you exited the role. And exiting the role is the one thing the system cannot tolerate. This is why rebellion today looks nothing like rebellion in the past. There are no barricades, no revolutions in the classical sense. The system has learned how to absorb dissent, monetize it, and neutralize it. You can protest, you can criticize, you can argue online. As long as you do so as a persona inside the framework, you are not a threat. You are engagement. Even resistance has been legalized. This brings us to one of the most effective illusions of modern times: rights. You're told you have rights, civil rights, political rights, economic rights. But notice how these rights function. They are permissions, not powers. They exist only within the system that grants them. They can be suspended, regulated, redefined, revoked in emergencies. True freedom does not require permission. It does not need to be written down. It exists regardless of recognition. This is why the distinction between freedom and liberty matters. Freedom is a natural condition. Liberty is a granted condition. Liberty can be extended, restricted, or withdrawn. Freedom cannot, unless it is denied. Modern societies fight endlessly for liberty, more rights, expanded protections, broader permissions. But they rarely question the structure that grants and withdraws them. The leash becomes longer, the cage becomes larger, the illusion becomes stronger. And the most effective illusion of all is participation. Voting feels powerful. Choosing leaders feels meaningful. Expressing opinion feels like agency. But participation does not equal control. In Roman terms, plebeians voted too. They expressed opinion, they participated in assemblies, but they did not own the system. They did not design the rules. They did not define the structure. The structure remained intact regardless of who occupied positions within it. Modern politics operates the same way. Parties change, leaders rotate, policies shift. But the underlying machine, legal, financial, administrative, remains untouched. Why? Because it does not belong to the public. It belongs to those who understand and control the system. This is why corporations outlive governments, why financial institutions survive crises, why laws change in wording but not in essence. The system is not ideological, it is operational. And once you see it this way, history begins to make sense. Empires rise and fall on the surface, but the operating system persists. Titles change, flags change, narratives change. but the logic of ownership remains. The Roman elite did not see themselves as rulers in the modern sense. They saw themselves as managers of resources, land, wealth, people. The concept of citizenship was never about belonging. It was about classification. This is why citizenship comes with obligations by default: taxes, military service, compliance, obedience to law. These are not negotiated, they are assumed. And this is why the system reacts so aggressively to anyone who attempts to exist outside classification. Nomads, stateless individuals, off-grid communities. They are not dangerous because of violence, they are dangerous because of precedent. If one person can exist without the system's inevitability collapses. So the system does everything it can to make such existence appear impossible, irresponsible, or insane. You are told you cannot survive without it, that chaos awaits outside, that safety exists only within structure. This is the same argument used by every master in history. And now we approach the psychological core of the entire mechanism. The system does not just control your actions, it shapes your self-concept. From childhood, you are taught to identify with your name as written on documents, to define yourself by nationality, by registration, by credentials, by legal status. You internalize the persona. You begin to believe that the mask is you.
This is the deepest form of control, because once identity is captured, behavior follows automatically. You obey laws not because you are forced to, but because disobedience feels like self-destruction, losing status, losing recognition, losing belonging. The fear is not of punishment, it is of erasure, and this fear keeps the system running without effort. At this point, the question is no longer historical or legal, it becomes personal. If the system relies on consent, what happens when consent is withdrawn internally? Not through rebellion, not through violence, but through awareness. Because awareness breaks identification, and identification is the glue holding everything together. You may not be able to exit physically, the world is closed, jurisdictions cover everything, but psychological exit is something the system cannot fully prevent. Once you understand that the persona is a role, not your essence, the relationship changes. You still operate, you still participate, but you no longer confuse participation with identity. This is where real danger begins, not for the system, but for you. Because once you see the structure, you can no longer pretend ignorance. You cannot unknow it, and the system does not reward those who see clearly. It tolerates critics, it tolerates rebels, it tolerates ideologies, but it does not tolerate clarity. Which brings us to the final stage of the trap and the question that cannot be avoided. If you are not the persona, if you are not the citizen, if you are not the asset, then who are you?
When everything you thought was solid starts to dissolve, the first reaction is denial. Not because the ideas are weak, but because they are too strong. They threaten the foundation on which your sense of self was built. Most people don't resist new information. They resist what that information implies. Because if you are not the citizen, if you are not the persona, if the documents do not define you, then responsibility returns to a place modern life has carefully avoided. It returns to you. For centuries, systems of power have trained people to outsource responsibility upward, to kings, to governments, to laws, to institutions. The promise was simple: obey, and you will be taken care of. Resist, and chaos will follow. This promise was never about protection. It was about relief. Relief from choice. relief from uncertainty, relief from the burden of being truly autonomous. True freedom is not comfortable. It does not come with guarantees. It does not provide safety nets or instructions. It demands judgment, risk, and accountability. That is why most people don't actually want it. They want liberty. They want permission. They want managed freedom inside defined limits. They want the illusion of control without the weight of consequence. And the system is perfectly designed to offer exactly that. Once you understand this, the system no longer appears evil in a cartoonish way. It appears efficient, cold, logical, almost indifferent. It does not hate you. It does not love you. It manages you. Just like a farmer does not hate crops, he optimizes them. This is why the language of power is so sterile, bureaucratic, impersonal. Why suffering is reduced to numbers. Why lives are measured in productivity, compliance, and economic value. You are not seen as a being. You are seen as a unit. And the most effective units are those who self-regulate. This is where the deepest layer of control operates: internal policing. You monitor your own behavior. You censor your own thoughts. You calculate risks not based on morality, but on legality. Not is this right, but is this allowed? The shift is subtle but devastating, because morality belongs to humans, legality belongs to systems. And when legality replaces morality, obedience replaces conscience. At this stage, many people ask the same desperate question: so what's the solution? They expect a blueprint, a strategy, a loophole, a way out. But that expectation itself reveals the problem.
You are still asking the system to save you from itself. There is no external escape. There is no unclaimed land. There is no legal form that grants sovereignty. Anyone promising a technical solution is selling a new cage with different colors. The only real shift happens internally. And that terrifies people more than any prison ever could. Because internal freedom cannot be delegated, it cannot be guaranteed, and it cannot be reversed once truly claimed. This is why ancient philosophies focused not on changing the world, but on understanding one's position within it. A slave who understands slavery is no longer owned in the same way as one who believes himself free. Awareness does not break chains physically, it breaks them psychologically. And psychological chains are the strongest ones the system relies on. Once you stop identifying with the persona, the system loses its most valuable leverage: fear. Fear of losing status, fear of losing recognition, fear of losing legality. You still operate within the system, but you no longer confuse compliance with identity. You understand that law is applied to roles, not to essence. This does not make you untouchable, it makes you conscious. And consciousness changes how power works on you. You stop reacting automatically. You stop internalizing guilt designed for the persona. You stop mistaking permission for morality. This is why systems throughout history have tried to control language, education, and narrative more than force. Because force creates martyrs. Awareness creates ghosts. People who are present but unowned, participating but not absorbed, seen but not fully captured. These people are dangerous, not because they revolt, but because they don't feed the machine the way it expects. They don't give blind loyalty. They don't confuse symbols for truth. They don't mistake identity for paperwork. They understand the difference between playing a role and being consumed by it. And now we arrive at the final unavoidable realization. The system does not collapse because people wake up. It adapts. It always has. What collapses is illusion, and illusion is what made obedience painless. Once illusion fades, every action becomes conscious. You still pay, you still comply where necessary, you still navigate the structure, but you no longer worship it. You no longer expect meaning from it.
You no longer confuse it with reality. This is the line the system hopes you never cross, because beyond this line, control becomes expensive again, and systems hate inefficiency. This is why the final choice is not dramatic, it is quiet. It happens privately, internally, without slogans or declarations. It is the moment you stop saying, "They allow me to live," and start saying, "I choose how I engage." Not rebellion, not withdrawal, but clarity. And clarity is irreversible. You will never look at a passport the same way, or a courtroom, or a flag, or a law. You will see tools, not truths, structures, not gods. And perhaps most unsettling of all, you will realize that the system's greatest strength was never force. It was your willingness to believe. So now the question is no longer historical. It is no longer legal. It is no longer philosophical. It is personal. Are you willing to live with the responsibility that comes with seeing clearly? Because once you understand that freedom was never taken from you, only obscured, you can no longer pretend ignorance. And ignorance was the most comfortable cage of all. The system will continue to exist. The world will continue to function. Nothing dramatic will happen tomorrow, except one thing. You will no longer belong to the illusion. And that is the beginning of something the system can never fully control.